Hey guys, Jess here from jewelrytutorialhq.com. Today I thought it would be fun to try a design with me or a bead along kind of thing where I sit down with wire and beads and I see what happens and talk through it as I go, mistakes and all. So you'll get to see my design process and some problem solving along the way. So if that sounds like fun and you're down for the ride, keep watching. So I know that I want to do something with some wire. I want to make some kind of a wire shape, and I would like to incorporate some of these Miyuki Delica beads. I have some pretty blues. I love this color palette. And I have a lot of other beads too that I may want to incorporate. I've got some dagger beads in a couple of different colors and some fire polished glass beads in a couple of different colors. What I'll do is, since I don't really know which beads I'm going to be using for sure, I will add them in the description below the video after I'm finished so you can get a better idea of the materials. I've also got some little faceted silver beads, and I've got a couple of different glass briolette drops and some ear wires and 2 gauges of wire. So I'm going to be making a frame using 20 gauge half hard wire, and I'm going to be attaching the beads using 26 gauge wire. This is also half hard. I do think dead soft wire would work just fine for this technique that I have in mind. So what I'm thinking is I'm going to make a frame and fill it with beads. See what happens. First thing I'm going to do is straighten off a length of the 20 gauge wire using a polishing cloth. If you don't have a polishing cloth, you can also do this with an old scrap of t-shirt material. You can fold it over a couple times, and I'm just pulling the wire straight to get any kinks out. And then what I'm going to do is actually kind of reinforce that curve. I think I'm going to start with a teardrop shape. So I'm going to work with the natural curve of the wire, and I am using, this is just an old prescription pill bottle, using this as a mandrel, which a mandrel is just something that you can bend your wire around to create shapes. So to make a teardrop, probably going to do a pair of earrings. I'm just going to bend the wire around this bottle and not bend it all the way around because I don't want to make a perfectly round shape. To make a teardrop, I'm just going to make sure that I've got the bottom part of the wire the bottom part of the teardrop tight against the bottle, the mandrel. And then I'm going to crisscross the top and just kind of play with it until I get about the size and shape that I want. And I think that looks really good for an earring. So what I'm going to do now is grab chain nose pliers, and actually, I'm going to do this with my finger first. Where it crosses over, I'm going to bend the long part of the wire. So this is still attached to the spool. And I do that because I didn't really know how much wire I was going to use. Bend that so it's sticking straight up from the top of the teardrop. And then, still holding the shape in place as much as I can, I'm going to bend that short tail of wire so that it's kind of at like a right degree angle. So I've got like a backwards L shape here. And then I'm going to twist to hook that around the top of the teardrop, kind of hold that in place. Now I can trim my wire. And for 20 gauge wire, I use a sturdier set of flush cutters. You'll notice when I start working with the 26 gauge, I've got a different set that I like for that. These are Xuron, can't remember the exact name. I'll put the link down or the information down in the description below the video. I'm going to trim off about 1 inch of wire. I'm using the back end of my flush cutters to do that so that it's a nice flat cut there just in case. And then I'm going to finish securing this piece of wire so that I can finish up the frame. I think that's going to make a nice earring. I'm just going to twist that around gently. So about 1.5 times, and chain nose pliers. These are actually bent chain nose pliers. I use these a lot. They're basically interchangeable with regular chain nose pliers. I like these because they've got a nice fine tip, and the bend kind of just makes it easier to do certain things. These are shipwreck beads. I'm not sure if they actually make these anymore. I wanted to get another set because I love these so much. Bent chain nose pliers, like I said, with a nice fine tip, if you can see that. And these are like my new favorite tool. I use these all the time. These are Xuron. I think they're needle nose, chain nose, and they are so tiny at the tip. These are awesome. I'll put that information below the video as well. So I'm going to use the bent chain nose, and I want to just kind of tidy that up, squeeze it together a little bit before I trim it off. Gently squeezing that coil around. so that it's a nice tight wrap. And I'm going to trim this on the back of the piece with my flush cutters. And then just make sure that's tucked down so it doesn't stick out, catch, or scratch. Normally when I'm working with thicker gauge wire like 20 gauge, I don't do a wrapped loop as often as I would with a finer gauge wire because it gets kind of bulky. You can see if I'm going to wrap the top part of the loop, there's going to be kind of a lot of wire there. So since this is good and sturdy half hard wire in this thick gauge, I'm going to go ahead and just do a simple, just a regular loop that's not like a wrapped loop. So I'm actually going to trim this a little bit. That's probably about a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch, about 1 centimeter maybe. And again with the back end of my flush cutter, so I get a nice flat end. And I like the flat end when I'm doing a simple loop because when it curls around, it, instead of having like just this little point where it touches the loop, it's more sturdy if it's a rounder shape. Got my round nose pliers, and I'm going to make a loop probably about 3 or 4 millimeters, and I think just by eyeballing it, that's going to be about right for this length of wire. So I'm just going to grab the wire with my round nose pliers and make sure that the end isn't sticking out so that I can get a nice round loop. And I'm going to roll that wire into loop. Sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing what I'm doing because the camera's right here in my face. So roll that into a loop. Looks like I misjudged a little bit, so I'm going to go for a smaller loop. There we go. Okay, and then I just need to straighten that up so that my earring's going to hang straight. Okay, well that looks pretty good. So normally at this point what I would do is go ahead and make the second shape so that it matches the first, but I'm not going to force you to sit through that. I know I want to use these beautiful, these are size 11-0 if I didn't mention that before. These are Miyuki delicate beads, and I've got, let's see, this is like a matte turquoise. I may not end up using all of these colors, so again, I will be sure to give you the information for the beads that I did end up using. So this is like a darker turquoise, and this is like a pretty dark blue. And then a kind of a dark turquoise. These last two look like they're lined, you know, where the outside is clear and then they've got the color on the inside. Oh my gosh, just realized I'm totally out of frame. Whoop! Sorry about that. So normally when I make a video, I record it usually a couple of times, and I go back and I edit the crap out of it, and I make sure I've got everything in frame, and sometimes I go back and retake if I need to. So we're just going to wing it and see how this goes. Hopefully it won't be too painful to watch, and I won't ramble too much. These are a light, they're kind of like a pearlescent light turquoise, and these are very similar, so I may not end up using both of those. But what I think I want to do is maybe try to do like a ombre pattern where it's shaded. So I start filling in the frame with beads at the top. I'm probably going to start with the lighter color and then go down to the bottom, and then maybe, if it works out, put like one of these drops here. So instead of beading all the way down, well, we'll see how it goes. But right now what I have in my mind is do about, you know, halfway down with the beads and see if we can add a drop in there, see how that looks. To start adding my beads, I'm going to straighten out a little bit of this 26 gauge wire. I'm going to start with just a couple of shorter pieces. What you could do is, sometimes people do this and they use one long piece of wire and they go across with all the beads. That doesn't always work out for me, and I'll kind of show you why when we get there. So I'm going to start, let's see, make sure this is the Okay, this is the front of the hoop. I'm going to start on the left side at the top, and I want the short end of the wire towards the top of the piece because we're going to be working down. I'm laying it over the piece, and I'm just like about an inch, and I'm going to wrap a couple of times to secure that wire. And then I'm going to slide it up to the top. I've got 3. I'm going to go one more. So 4 coils around the frame. I'm going to squish those together with these needle nose pliers. And sometimes what I do is if this tail is long enough, let's see if I can try it. The tail is long enough, I can do like a temporary wrap around the top just to hold it in place so this doesn't slide all over when I'm trying to add the beads and tighten it up. And actually I'm going to unwrap there. So I've got this long tail of wire pointing in towards the frame, and it is on top. I'm going to see if I can just straighten out that little kink there real quick. Squeeze it gently with chain nose pliers so there's not a bend. Okay, I think I'm going to start with these pearlescent. This looks like the lightest color, so I'm going to see how many is going to fit up there in the top. I'm going to guess it's going to be about 2. You know, let's go with 1. And I'm going to wrap, I'm still on top of the frame. I'm going to wrap around on the other side just a couple of times. And then I'm going to have the wire facing in towards the frame, but going to the left, and it's behind the frame. And I'm going to add some more beads. So what I'm looking at right here is I need to make room for the beads, so I think I actually need to do another coil or 2. Let's see if that works better. Hope you can see that. Now it should be probably 2 beads this time. And I think I'm going to do a couple of rows of each color and see how that looks. Well, it's probably 2 rows of each color. Okay, so I actually need to add another coil to make space for this because I don't want these really sloping. I want to go straight across, or at least arc a little bit so that it's not slanted, for at least for this type of shape where it's symmetrical. So I'm going to add another coil on that side. And when you're working with frames like this, it's important, even with the half hard wire, they're still kind of delicate. So as you work, just try to be aware that you can still squeeze these out of shape. And if you grip it really hard with your fingers, you might get some waves. And that's normal, but just try to hold it gently as much as you can. Okay, so I've got, looks like 4 coils there now. And this is going to be different for all of your beads, of course. And the larger your beads, the harder it is to actually get them to fit properly, which is why I like working with the really small beads for this type of project. Okay, I think that's going to work. I'm going to add 2 beads, same color as the first. That looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap on. So since I'm coming from the back on this one, I'm going to go ahead and wrap on the back for this row. And generally it tends to alternate. So it'll be like go over the top on both sides and then under both sides and then over. Just to kind of keep it looking as uniform as possible. And I'm going to take these chain nose pliers real quick, and I'm just going to gently squeeze this coil. Make sure it's tight and in place. Then I'm going to come around the back. And sometimes what I do is I'd like for them to be sitting on the same plane as much as possible. So sometimes if I can get this wire so that instead of really laying on one side of the frame or the other, if I can kind of tuck it into where it's like in the middle of the wire. I know that's so picky, but overall, I think at the end of the piece, it looks a little nicer. So I'm just going to see if I can gently bend that in. And that looks a lot better to me. And I wish I would have done that with the first one. That's okay. Okay, so I did 3 wraps. And I'm going to tuck that wire at the back. I'm being very careful because you can crush those beads. There we go. So that sits a little better. And now again, I want to make sure that I have room for my next row of beads without it slanting down. Sometimes what I'll do is just do like 1 or 2 rows, which is why I start with a shorter piece of wire. The longer you go back and forth across with the same piece of wire, it does tend to kind of zigzag, and I really don't want that. So I just do a few rows at a time, and I think that looks a lot better, personally. So that's such a small area. I'm going to do another row of these. Okay, so that's more beads than I need, but what I usually do when I start getting on the longer rows, just thread on the beads and then lay it across and see where it naturally wants to stop. I think it's going to be 4 beads. So far we've got 1, 2, 4. And again, it's going to be different depending on what shape you make. You can use this technique for pretty much any shape. You can do this with round, square, rectangle, star shape. I don't care. It's pretty much the same. Okay, a few wraps on this side. If you're working with bigger beads, you're going to need more space between the rows, obviously, so you end up using a lot more wire. So that's something to think about. And now we're behind the frame again. I think I'm going to switch to my next color. I feel like those are actually too close. I'm gonna skip over those. I'm gonna do these. So these are like a pretty teal lined bead, it looks like. Okay, so this is starting to curve, and I actually kind of like that. So I'm gonna work with that. I'm gonna go from now on. I'm gonna start to curve the next row. But with that in mind, it looks like I put an extra coil on this side, so I'm just gonna unwrap that real quick. See if I can do it without dropping all these beads. Oh, and where am I? I'm lost. Front, back. Okay. All right, so now there's a little kink in the wire. So the reason I'm doing this video this way, I thought this might be helpful to see, how a piece of work kind of progresses. You're going to make mistakes. Things aren't going to always work out the way that you think. And I want to encourage you to play. That's what I'm doing today. I sat down with the expectation that I'm going to play with beads and wire, and whatever happens, happens. And hopefully it will be awesome. And if not, that's okay too, because I'm just playing. I'm going to tuck that wire around inside the frame a little bit. Okay, that looks good. And I probably have room for 1 more row if I want to use the same piece of wire. I think that would be okay. So now I'm back on the front. I'm going to tuck that wire in towards the frame. Okay, I'm going to do another row of these teal beads. So I've got a lot of time on my hands now because if you're watching this video in the future, we are currently under federal guidelines to stay at home for the next 30 days. It's already been at least, gosh, I lost track of time, at least 2 weeks. So you're not allowed to go to work unless you are in an essential, quote unquote, what they consider essential business. And I'm a jewelry designer, so that is not essential business. So I'm actually really thankful for this time to be able to play and create for myself. And I thought I'd just share that with you because this is what I was going to be doing today anyway. So I thought I'd just turn the camera on and roll with it. But I hope everybody is safe and well, and it's important to take care of ourselves. And for me personally, I get a lot of anxiety. Like sometimes it's random, sometimes it's not, but this type of thing really helps soothe me. I find this very meditative, and really the fiddlier the better for me, because I can just kind of get lost in it and focus. Okay, so this is going to be my second piece of wire. And just so I don't keep poking myself with this, I'm going to go ahead and unwrap this temporary wrap from the top here and just trim that at the back of the piece. Always try to trim at the back of the piece. And these are the finer flush cutters that I told you about. I love these because they are so fine and pointed. You can see side by side, hope you can see how much finer the tips are in these. So these are great for larger gauge wires, but when you're working with tiny stuff like this, it is really nice to be able to have these nice fine tips that actually cut all the way up to the very tip. That's great for doing detailed wire work, working with fine wire. So I'm going to take advantage of that, and I'm going to snip as close as I can. And then just to be sure, come and tuck that in with the chain nose pliers. So that's looking pretty cool. I'm going to do another row of these teal, starting this row the same way. Technically this would be like an under row, but I'm not going to bother with that because it's easier for me to wrap it this way. So I'm going to start a new piece. I'm going to do 3 or 4 coils. Okay, and trim it back. I know this is getting super repetitive, but some people like to kind of zone out and watch that kind of thing. I find myself a lot of times like watching that type of video on YouTube myself, where it's, you know, just watching somebody painting. It could be like painting dots, doesn't matter. It's kind of mesmerizing to me. So hopefully this is not deathly boring. If it is, you're probably in the wrong place, and that's okay. Find something more exciting. One more row of these. So I want you to let me know what you think about this style of video. Like I said, it's very different from my other videos where I normally plan everything ahead of time and edit out all of the extra, you know, all of the repeated stuff, all of the mistakes, all of the rambling. What's next? So now I think I like this, and then I'm going to do that. And then at some point, I'm going to see if we can add a drop in there. So I think I'd rather have it a little too short. Oh, actually that's going to work perfectly. I was going to say I'd rather have it a little too short than too long, because if it's too long, it's going to bow out in the space. And of course, if you wanted to incorporate that into the design on purpose, you definitely can. But I like the way they look above there, so I'm going to just keep going with that. So I'm going to take off one more bead. So I don't remember if I finished my last thought. I was going to say, please let me know what you think of this type of video. It's actually a lot easier for me to do them this way because I don't have to edit as much, which takes a lot of time and sometimes not super fun. And if you hate it, you can let me know that too, because I don't want to make videos that you hate. And we'll go back to the other way. I think that is looking so good. It's kind of like calming ocean colors. This is like beachy Caribbean. And I know we're not there yet. I'm not ready to end this yet. I'm going to keep beading. But one thing to note is that when you do end a piece of wire, it tends to slide down, which is really only a problem if your last row is like just one piece of wire from left to right. as opposed to kind of attached to the previous row, then that row can slide down. So it is important to, as you start getting towards where you think you're going to end, make sure you have plenty of wire to work with so that your last row doesn't just detach from the rest of the pattern. Hope that makes sense. I'm not always great at describing things on the fly, which is another reason I usually pre-record everything and do voiceovers. This is almost like live format. I don't know that I'm brave enough to try actually live format yet, but we'll see. I'm going to straighten off some of this 26 gauge wire, again, just using the polishing cloth. For the finer gauges of wire, you could actually use nylon jaw pliers, but mine are kind of chewed up right now, so I'm just going to do this. This works just fine. And when I say straightening wire, I don't usually mean stick straight. I just mean get all the bends out. So it's most likely still going to have a curve. That's totally fine. That's what I mean when I say straighten out wire. There's just so many ways you can finish out something like this. I really love this technique. Like I said, you could stop in the middle, you can add a drop, you can go all the way down, do some on the top and then some on the bottom and then space in the middle or on the side. I think I've seen those before where you have like the ones I saw is probably a circle, but you know, like the bottom right quadrant is a nice curved area that's been beaded like this, and then the top left, and it has like a really modern, nice looking effect. I would love to hear what you're doing to amuse yourselves. If you are stuck at home right now, tell me in the comments. How's it going? What's it like? Now I've got to figure out how much space this bead takes up. Oh, okay, so it's probably not going to work with these tiny beads because the top of the bead there is going to either stick up over the previous row, and I don't really like that, or it's going to stick under. I don't like that either. So either I'm going to skip the drop or I'm going to use some larger beads instead. So let's problem solve here. I do really love these drops. If it doesn't work out, I will be okay. What do I have? I have these like aqua with the AB finish. But since I went with the darker beads here, I'm probably going to do something more like this instead. Stick with the darker. These are 4mm faceted fire polished. Color is a sapphire AB. Actually, I have these in my shop. I'm going to put links to all of the beads below. Some of them I sell, some of them I don't, but I'll help you know where to find them if you want to recreate this with the same beads. I'm going to try some of these sapphire 4mm. See if they, first of all, see if they will even fit. Oh, looks kind of pretty. I think I like that. So that is, well, that actually might be a problem because this is an even number of beads. So unless this guy takes up 2 beads, which it does not, it's not going to fit right in the middle. But let's see if that even works to fix the previous problem. And not, well, kind of. But honestly, I don't really like the idea of having to do a tiny bead, a medium bead, and then this. I don't want to do too many different beads on one row. That's kind of going to mess up the pattern for me. So if I can't make that work, I'm probably just going to skip the drop. And also because I don't think I like the way this bead kind of, the color of this bead, it's really pretty, but it kind of breaks up the ombre. I like the fading, or the shading from light to dark. So that, you know what, not going to do it. Let's see if this darker bead works, and if not, we are scrapping the drop. Might be okay if I can get the other beads to line up. But, okay, sorry, this is me thinking out design process out loud. I think the first thing I want to do actually is do another row of this darker bead because I've got 3 and 3 and 3 of each. So just to keep the pattern going. So are you guys as picky as me when you sit down to create something? Okay, so I have enough wire to do one more row. Let's see how many of these 4mm beads will fit, and if we can do an even number with that one bead in the middle spaced nicely, that might work. Okay, now we've got 6 beads again, so that's not going to work. I do kind of like the way that looks though. But now what I'm thinking about is, what if I put some of these little faceted silver beads? So I think that actually would look really pretty with a row of silver. Maybe a row of silver above and a row of the silver below, and then that would be it. I think that looks really nice. Okay, that's what we're doing. When the wire starts to get short like this, I usually just use my chain nose pliers to pull it around, so I can pull it around tightly and it's a lot easier to grip. Okay, we are rocking and rolling. So I know I'm going to do 2 more rows. The next row is going to be these, and then the last row is going to be these silver beads, but I want to make sure I have enough wire to do all of those both of those with one piece. So I'm going to cut a slightly longer piece just to make sure. A lot of times when I make something like this, I just work with scraps that I have. I save, especially if I'm working with silver, I save all my scraps, and I tend to have a lot of scraps that are like, 4 inches, 5 inches long. So usually for this type of thing, that's what I would use as the scraps, but I don't want to dig through my scrap bucket on camera. And again, I'm starting over here because I just finished this previous row over here. Got too much space here. What I would do is probably a silver bead on each end. That might work because that wouldn't disrupt the pattern too much. Nothing ever seems to work out perfectly the way that you picture it, so it's good to be able to adapt and have options. Well, hold on. Thought of something I wanted to try real quick. See how these dagger beads might look. I thought it'd be fun to have something hanging down in the middle, but my original idea with the drop didn't work out. Maybe these will work. I think that's pretty cool. Gonna go with that. Oh, unfortunately though, wait, dang it. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. See, I wasn't expecting this to be my last row, so this is a little bit of a problem. If I attach it on this side, this last row can just go wherever it feels like. It's not going to work for me. So I guess one option, if I want to stick with this design instead of changing my mind again, sorry about that, then I would wrap it around once below the coils here. And when we get to the back, then I would jump this row and then I would wrap here a couple times to anchor it. And that would hold these last 2 rows together, and therefore it would anchor it to the rest of the piece. So that should work. This other side is still kind of loose, but if we can at least anchor one side, that would be okay. Not sure if I really want to do that. Well, let's try it. Let's see what happens. And if it doesn't work, then I would cut that row off and go back to my other idea, which is to use a row of the 4mm and then another row of the silver. And that way I would have at least 2 rows on the bottom and they wouldn't slide around as much. Okay, so I've gone around once. And then what I was talking about is going above. This might look really messy and I'm probably going to hate it. Go above the previous row coils and through that little gap. If there's room, there we go. Again, making sure that you're doing this on the back of the piece because this is going to show. And then, okay, so can you see that? I've gone up above the previous rose coils, and then I'm going to go around probably twice. At least once. See if there's room. And then again, end on the back. And then trim that wire. And we'll see how it looks at the front. I think that's pretty fun. That's a fun, flirty little earring. And from the front, you really can't see that we did that goofy wrap at the end. And I'm not too worried about this because it's not going to move far and it's not loose enough to where it's going to sag while you're wearing it. So should be okay. I'm going to attach an ear wire. And thankfully, when I make the second one, it's going to go a lot faster. I really would love to hear what you think of this type of video. I'm assuming if you watched to the end, it wasn't too hard to get through, so thanks for sticking with me. And if you made these earrings, I'd love to see how they turned out. Tag me on Instagram at JewelryTutorialHQ and check out my website for more fun, free jewelry tutorials and tips. See you next time!